Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. Amaka stood at the grand entrance of Vicland, dressed modestly in a well-pressed blouse and long skirt. Her security pass trembling slightly in her hand. Though her shoes were cleaned and her hair neatly packed, she felt like a stranger in a world carved from steel and secrets. As she stepped into the glass corridors lined with sleek panels and artificial smiles, she felt dozens of eyes pierce her soul. Everyone knew who she was, the girl who pushed a confused old woman in a wheelbarrow, who had somehow ended up being invited by the CEO herself. Most of the employees offered her courteous but empty greetings, their smiles hollow and polite. The air was thick with tension, and the whispers were louder than the voices that welcomed her. It was clear she wasn't seen as one of them. She was the outsider, the charity case. And worse, she was seen as a threat. Chief Alawu was the first to greet her. With a grin too wide for his face and a voice dripping with fake concern, he clasped her shoulder. "Welcome to the family, Amaka," he said, his tone masking his true thoughts. His assistants circled like vultures, taking note of her every movement. "You'll be reporting to me directly," he added, casually slipping it in, despite Victoria's explicit instructions. Amaka nodded with respectful silence, but her gut twisted. The look in his eyes wasn't trust, it was control. She knew how to read people, and this man reeked of power hunger. As he led her to a tiny office tucked far from the executive wing, she saw the strategic isolation for what it was. He wasn't welcoming her into the fold, he was boxing her out. But Amaka, raised in survival and baptized in street wisdom, knew when to smile and when to watch. So she smiled, but her ears were open. Throughout the day, Amaka worked quietly, observing patterns. Who answered to whom, which departments were nervous, and who avoided whose eye. She noticed subtle things, meetings held behind closed doors she wasn't invited to, documents going missing from the archives, and most strangely, the absence of Victoria from the entire system. Her name wasn't on the board list. Her office remained locked. A young cleaner whispered to her while emptying the trash, "They say she's sick," but no one seen her. That night, alone in her small room in the company guest quarters, Amaka wrote everything she saw. She wasn't just a girl in a wheelbarrow anymore. She was a girl walking into fire, and she needed to know where every spark came from. Victoria Nwoko sat motionless in a plush, reclining chair beside a window that overlooked nothing but high concrete walls. Her room was magnificent by all outward appearances, velvet curtains, marble floors, and imported furniture, but it was a gilded cage. Every morning, a nurse administered pills without explanation, and every night, a sedative made her drift away before she could think too much. On good days, she remembered Amaka. On bad ones, she didn't know why her fingers trembled or why her reflection looked so old. But there were moments, brief but fierce, when her mind broke through the fog, and she saw the lies. "This is not my house," she would whisper. "Where is Amaka?" But the nurse would smile, pat her hand, and say, "You're just confused again, Ma." Then came the pills, always the pills, and the fog returned. The room had no visitors unless sanctioned by the board. Her calls were monitored. Her diary had been taken. Even her emails were filtered. Victoria, once the fiercest woman in real estate, was now a prisoner dressed in designer clothes. Chief Alawu had ensured everything looked like concern. "We can't risk bad press," he told the staff. "The CEO needs rest." But behind the scenes, he and Bar Igioma had seized executive authority. With Victoria deemed mentally unstable and Amaka cast as an opportunist, they moved fast to appoint themselves as acting CEO and head legal counsel respectively. The staff, trained to obey hierarchy, did as they were told. And in board meetings, filled with handshakes and hush money, Victoria's name faded from the agenda, replaced by profit projections and talks of restructuring. Yet something had begun to shift in Victoria's mind. Each time she was sedated, a small part of her fought back. Her dreams became clearer. Images of her betrayal, the wheelbarrow, Amaka's kind eyes. The more they tried to erase her, the more her soul screamed for clarity. She began refusing the night pills, hiding them under her tongue. She scribbled memories on napkins and tucked them under the mattress. Slowly, her fogged world began to sharpen. And one day, when Alawu came to her with fake smiles and false reassurances, she stared into his eyes with a clarity he didn't expect. She didn't say anything that day. She simply nodded, smiled weakly, and watched him walk away. But inside, something had returned. The queen was waking. Back at the company, Amaka's senses were on high alert. Her official title was executive assistant, but in truth, she was relegated to petty admin tasks. However, that gave her the freedom to observe. She noticed which board members gathered after hours, which elevators were restricted, and how certain staff would fall silent the moment she entered a room. One afternoon, while organizing files in the legal department, she saw a red folder labeled Transitional Leadership Strategy. Out of curiosity, she reached for it, only for a junior secretary to snatch it away. "That's not for your eyes," the woman whispered coldly. "Don't dig into what doesn't concern you." It was the first time Amaka saw fear, real, choking fear, in someone else's eyes. Something deep was being hidden. She could feel it. Later that week, Amaka overheard a heated argument between two senior staff members outside the boardroom. One man hissed, "We can't keep holding secret meetings." "If the press finds out," the other replied. "Do you want to lose everything? She's gone. Accept it." That same night, Amaka returned to the office, after hours under the pretense of retrieving her bag. With trembling hands, she accessed the digital archives using a shared passcode she'd remembered. Dozens of files related to Victoria had been moved to an encrypted folder. Password protected. The CEO's entire digital trail had been scrubbed from the public system. No outgoing mails. No meeting logs. Even her signature access badge was listed as inactive. It was as if Victoria had never existed. But it wasn't just silence that concerned Amaka. It was what the silence covered. In the break room, she approached a timid cleaner she had seen lingering near the east wing. "Do they ever let anyone in there?" Amaka asked softly. The woman looked around nervously before whispering, "Only Madam Igioma and Chief Alawu go in. But sometimes I hear voices. Sometimes the old woman cries." Amaka's heart clenched. She knew now, with a certainty that made her stomach twist, Victoria was alive, hidden, and silenced. And whatever was happening behind those closed doors wasn't about care. It was about control. She went home that night, unable to sleep. Her body was tired, but her soul was awake, and from this moment forward, she knew she couldn't just observe anymore. She had to act. The company building felt heavier with each step Amaka took. Every corridor whispered a different judgment. Every passing glance carried the weight of something unspoken. She had begun confiding in Mr. Adebayo, a senior manager who once worked closely with Victoria. He spoke with gentle authority, shared past experiences about Victoria's early days, and even called Amaka courageous for standing by the old woman. She believed he was one of the few who still honored the memory of Vicland's real founder. But her trust would soon crumble like a poorly built wall. Amaka, in desperation, had shown him the copy of the notes she found about missing board meeting minutes, and had voiced her suspicions about the company lawyer. Adebayo had leaned forward, nodding carefully, and promised to look into it personally. 2 days later, she was summoned by HR. The room was cold, sterile, and filled with tension. They presented her with a formal query, alleging that she was trying to disrupt company operations and spread conspiracy. Her words had been taken out of context, twisted into a narrative of rebellion and insubordination. The same documents she entrusted to Mr. Adebayo were now presented as evidence against her, proof that she was gathering sensitive information unlawfully. HR handed her a warning letter and reminded her that any further breach would result in termination and legal action. Amaka stood frozen, humiliated, and devastated. She realized she had been played, her trust weaponized and used to paint her as a threat. After the meeting, Amaka stepped outside, needing air but getting none. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in. Mr. Adebayo passed her in the corridor, and for a fleeting moment their eyes met. There was no remorse in his, only calculated indifference. That single look stripped away all remaining doubt. He had betrayed her. The man who spoke fondly of Victoria had traded loyalty for personal gain, likely promised a seat at the top if Alawu succeeded. Amaka's heart sank. The walls of Vicland, once a place she hoped would elevate her, now seemed designed to crush her. She walked away slowly, her head held high for the sake of dignity, but inside, a storm was rising. She had been betrayed, but she wasn't broken. Not yet. The news broke like thunder on a clear day. A newly discovered will surfaced, signed and notarized, allegedly from a time shortly after Victoria's early dementia diagnosis. It stated that if Victoria were ever mentally incapacitated, the full authority of the company would transfer to Chief Alawu. The announcement was made during a staff-wide memo, followed by an emergency board meeting. The company's legal team spoke of legitimacy, of procedural clarity, and how it was in the best interest of continuity. But Amaka, still shaken by her betrayal, knew something was terribly wrong. The handwriting, the clauses, the precise language, it felt too convenient, too clean, too final. Yet when she tried to speak, her voice was cut off by a stern security escort waiting at the front gate. Her access was revoked. Her badge failed at the scanner. She had been completely locked out. As she stood at the entrance of the Vicland compound, cars drove past without a glance. Some of the staff who once smiled at her now looked away. Others whispered with visible fear in their eyes. She wanted to scream, to shake someone and demand they open their eyes, but she knew what had happened. They had framed her. Her earlier warning letter now served as justification for her removal. The media had already begun picking up quiet murmurs of her being unstable, of her overstepping her place. Alawu was playing chess with people's lives, and Amaka was now seen as a disgraced pawn, easily discarded. She didn't know whether to cry or fight, but one thing was certain. She couldn't walk away, not yet. Not while Victoria was still locked in that golden cage. As night fell, Amaka sat on a roadside bench across from the company building. She watched the lights from the top floors flicker through the darkness, like signals from a distant war zone. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten all day. Her last salary hadn't even dropped into her account. She checked her phone again. No messages, no calls. Not even from Victoria. A part of her began to wonder if this was the end, if she had been foolish to believe in change. But then she thought of the wheelbarrow. The day she first saw that helpless old woman by the roadside and chose to help when no one else did. That memory became her fire. They had locked her out of the building, but they hadn't locked her out of the truth. Not yet. Chief Alawu stood before the staff with polished grace, wearing a calm face and speaking with rehearsed humility. In these uncertain times, he said, leadership must protect what our founder built. Bar. Igioma flanked him, her cold smile betraying no regret. They reassigned departments, disbanded Victoria's loyal teams, and ordered layoffs, starting with low-level workers who had once spoken kindly about Amaka or Victoria. Alawu announced a new era of reform, framed as cost-saving and modern restructuring. His voice echoed through the building's loudspeakers, as though he had been ordained to rule. And many believed him. Fear does that. It replaces truth with survival. Anyone who dared protest faced transfer, demotion, or outright dismissal. Vicland, once a legacy of vision and strength, had become a corporate dictatorship. Outside the walls of power, Amaka watched her name dissolve into mockery. Online gossip blogs posted vague stories of a maid-turned-fraud. Rumors hinted at her trying to usurp Victoria's empire. The same people who had celebrated her kindness now accused her of being a gold digger. She couldn't defend herself. Every account she had was being flagged. Her bank account was frozen for investigations. She was stripped of everything except her spirit. But it was her silence that worried them most. In truth, Amaka wasn't idle. She was watching, gathering, connecting. She began visiting people who knew Victoria before the dementia, hoping someone had something, anything, that could change this tide. In a dimly lit shop tucked behind a forgotten street, Amaka met an old man who once managed one of Victoria's early real estate properties. His hands shook as he handed her an envelope wrapped in a plastic cover, as though it was sacred. She trusted me to keep this. Said to hand it only if something ever looked wrong at the top. Inside the envelope were documents, old signatures, land deeds, and a real will sealed and dated years after the fake one. As Amaka held them, tears ran down her cheeks. This was it. A second chance. Proof. She had been thrown out, silenced, and disgraced, but now she had the key. And she knew exactly what she would do with it. Let the storm begin. Amaka stood under the broken shade of the rundown street shop, staring at the envelope in her hands as though it were made of gold. Inside was not just a file, it was a resurrection. The original will was clear, bearing Victoria Nwoko's unmistakable signature and thumbprint, verified and notarized by a lawyer who had since left the country. The dates on the document nullified the fake version Alawu presented. It contained Victoria's full asset listings and clearly stated, "Ownership of Vic land is solely mine. No power of attorney shall override this document in my absence or illness." Her breath hitched. She turned to the old man, Mr. Kalu, who looked around nervously, urging her to leave quickly. "If they find you here, they'll silence me too," he whispered. "Take it and go. Don't trust anyone, not even those who smile." Amaka nodded and fled through back streets, clinging to the file like a fragile lifeline. That evening, she sat in a rented room, lit only by a flickering lantern. Her bruises from the past attack still throbbed, and her voice trembled when she whispered aloud, "I have to fight back." Her hand trembled as she reread every line of the document, her heart pounding louder with each confirmation of truth. She connected the paper trail with the lies she'd been fed, the false suspension, the fake will, the bogus stories online. Every stitch had been planned by Alawu and Bar. Ijeoma. And she knew they wouldn't stop at character assassination. They had tried physical harm once, and if they knew she had this file, they'd try again. But this time, she wouldn't act alone. She began listing names of journalists, influencers, and whistleblowers, people who had spoken truth before. She needed a voice louder than theirs. If she couldn't walk through Vicland's doors again yet, she would storm the gates of public opinion. But timing was everything. Before making any move, Amaka hid the original will inside a secondary location, a friend's mother's tailoring shop, sewn into the back cushion of a worn-out chair. She then made 3 copies, each hidden in different areas of Lagos, and uploaded scans to encrypted drives. She sent a digital copy to a contact abroad who specialized in whistleblower cases. It wasn't just about protecting herself. It was about securing the truth so it couldn't be buried again. Then, she did something unexpected. She posted an anonymous tweet. "If a billionaire's real will was hidden to steal her empire, would you still stay silent?" It got little attention at first, but Amaka wasn't worried. She had the storm in her hands now. All she had to do was wait, and strike when the enemy least expected it. 2 days later, as the sun bled through Lagos traffic and painted the city with golden fatigue, Amaka walked into a small cafe in Surulere where she had agreed to meet a blogger she trusted, Chinedu, known for exposing government scams. She wore a scarf and dark glasses, trying to remain invisible. She had messaged him using an alias, but once she saw his face, cautious, honest, she knew she had chosen right. She slid the file across to him and whispered, "This is what they don't want anyone to see." Chinedu flipped through it, eyes widening. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "From a truth," she replied, cold and clear. "If I die tomorrow, you must release it." He nodded solemnly, assuring her it would be safe. But that very assurance became a curse before the hour ended. As she stepped out of the cafe, Amaka felt a chill crawl up her spine. 2 men on a motorcycle began trailing her. She changed directions twice, once into a side street and again through a market, but the bike was persistent. Her instincts screamed. Then came the shove. A 3rd man emerged from nowhere and pushed her into an alleyway between 2 locked shops. She fought back, throwing punches and screaming, but one of them hit her ribs hard. "You think you're smart," one of them hissed. "Next time, it will be your last breath. Stay silent or vanish like your mother." That last sentence shook her. They knew everything, her past, her family, her every move. As they fled, leaving her bruised and bleeding beside a trash heap, she curled up not just from the pain, but from the realization. This war was darker than she imagined. Still, Amaka didn't retreat. After washing her wounds in silence and taking painkillers with stale bread, she sat and recorded a message. In it, she held the file and said, "If anything happens to me, you'll know who did it. Vic land was stolen, and I have proof." She sent it to 3 influencers anonymously, including Chinidu. She turned off her phone and disappeared into the night, hiding in the guest quarters of a childhood friend who owed her nothing, but had once been saved from a false accusation by Amaka. She could no longer afford fear. She had seen too much, survived too much. The girl who once pushed a billionaire in a wheelbarrow had now pushed herself into a war where silence could mean death. But her spirit, scarred as it was, still refused to bend. Inside the east wing of Vicland's private estate, a luxury medical suite built more like a hotel, Victoria sat in a tailored robe, staring at the wall. But her mind, once clouded, was now sharp again. For weeks, she had feigned confusion, letting the drugs dull her reactions while her body detoxed. She recalled everything now, from the day she was betrayed by the man she loved, to the moment she was wheeled away from Amaka's shack by men pretending to help. She remembered the cold smile on Alawu's face, the fake concern in Igioma's voice, and the way they spoke about her in whispers, as though she were dead. She had watched, silent and still, as nurses injected her and guards monitored her. But now she was awake, and watching, and listening. That morning, Alawu and Igioma walked in, pretending to do a wellness check. They didn't know the cameras had been replaced by a nurse loyal to Victoria. They didn't know the recorder in her pillow was on. "We've given you everything," Alawu said with false sweetness. "Luxury, care, protection. All we need is your silence." Igioma added, "Just stay out of public sight. No more surprises. You've done enough damage." They stood close, thinking her mind was mush. But Victoria looked at them slowly and smiled, the kind of smile that comes from knowing a secret you will soon unleash. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'm resting, just as you ordered." They left, confident, smug. But the recording continued to roll, capturing every incriminating word. The Queen was not just back. She was baiting them into confession. Later that night, Victoria summoned the trusted nurse, gave her a flash drive, and said just 5 words. "Take this to the girl." The nurse nodded and left. Victoria stood by the window, staring into the dark horizon. Her hands were steady again. Her mind was no longer drowning. And her heart, though battered, was burning with one mission, to take back what was stolen. She thought of Amaka, of the kindness she received from a girl who had nothing but heart. "She carried me when no one else would," Victoria whispered. "Now it's my turn to carry her." Outside the estate, thunder rolled in the sky. The Queen had awakened, and vengeance now had purpose. The knock on the guest house door was soft but insistent. Amaka's heart pounded as she approached it, armed not with weapons, but with the weight of survival. When she opened the door, she didn't expect the sight of a uniformed nurse holding a sealed envelope and a small digital recorder. The nurse said only one thing: "She remembers everything." Amaka's legs gave way, and she sat down heavily. The nurse continued, "Victoria wants to see you. Tonight. No one must know." Inside the envelope were photos of Alawu and Igioma standing over Victoria with documents, forcing her to sign. The flash drive included audio recordings of them mocking her, threatening her, and plotting to keep her silent forever. Amaka clutched the envelope to her chest like it was oxygen. "We're not crazy," she whispered to herself. "They really did all this." The nurse smiled. "She said to tell you, the Queen is ready." Amaka arrived at the secluded bungalow near Victoria's estate at exactly 11:30 p.m. Her ribs still ached, and her face still bore faint bruises from the last attack, but her eyes were alight with fire. When she walked in and saw Victoria seated, dressed in white, radiant and alert, she froze. "You're back," she whispered. Victoria stood and walked to her, reaching out with trembling arms. "You carried me when I didn't even know who I was," she said softly. "Now let me carry you through this storm." They embraced, both crying, not from weakness, but from strength rediscovered. It wasn't just a reunion. It was a rising. For hours, they sat together, piecing every event, every betrayal, every weapon the enemy had forged against them. Victoria shared her passwords, her secrets, her fears. Amaka, in turn, shared the will, the hidden file, the threats, the pain. That night, two broken women began planning a war, not for revenge, but for truth. Victoria insisted on one thing: their return must be unexpected and public. They think I'm finished. Let them keep thinking that. We'll let them bury themselves. Amaka agreed. They've hurt too many people. They must answer to everyone. A detailed plan was drawn. They would storm the company not with lawyers or letters, but with truth, timing, and witnesses. The next morning, Victoria signed an official document revoking all temporary authority and reinstating her status as CEO. It was scanned and prepared for the press. A letter was sent to the board announcing an emergency meeting. Then came the message to the staff: Vicland's founder returns tomorrow. Be present. Amaka and Victoria sat in the stillness of dawn as the city stretched awake, unaware that the greatest storm was coming. Victoria placed a hand on Amaka's and whispered, "I've seen lions fall. I've seen kings beg. What they did to me, and to you they'll pay, and the world will see it." The next day, Vicland headquarters buzzed with rumors. Staff who had been silenced or ignored received cryptic emails and messages. Come to the lobby at 11 a.m. Something is about to change. Many thought it was another reshuffle. Some believed it was the announcement of a merger. Chief Alawu, dressed in his usual agbada, walked through the halls with a smug expression, telling anyone who asked, "Big decisions are coming. Stay loyal and you'll benefit." He stood at the glass balcony, watching the crowd build downstairs, unaware that the storm he thought he controlled was about to consume him. Meanwhile, Igioma sat in her corner office, rehearsing a speech for a fake founder's tribute, meant to solidify her public control. They thought they had won. They thought the queen was dead. But exactly at 11 a.m., the entrance doors slid open, and Victoria walked in. Gasps rippled through the building like a wave of electricity. Phones dropped. Coffee cups shattered. Staff members froze. Victoria Nwoko stood at the center of the lobby wearing a fitted navy blue suit. No makeup, no jewelry, just truth. Amaka stood beside her in a plain gown, holding a leather folder. No security detail. No lawyers. Just presence. Victoria raised her hand. "I want everyone here. Right now." Her voice echoed. Alawu, watching from above, turned pale and rushed downstairs. "What is the meaning of this?" he barked. "This is private property." Victoria turned, slowly, then nodded at Amaka. She opened the folder and pulled out the recorder. A single button was pressed. The entire lobby filled with the sound of Alawu's voice from days ago. "Just stay silent. We've taken care of everything. Nobody needs to know the truth." Then Igioma's voice: "We already forged the will. She's just a face now." The silence was thunderous. Security tried to intervene, but were halted by the staff. They had heard enough. Phones were recording, tears were falling, and whispers turned to chants. "She's back. Madame Victoria is back." Victoria stepped forward. "You've all been lied to, manipulated, fired for telling the truth, made to doubt your memories. I was kept under drugs and lies. But I remember everything now." A roar of applause burst out. Igioma rushed out with trembling lips, yelling at the media now swarming the building. "It's all fake. It's manipulated." But she was ignored. Then, in the middle of the chaos, police officers arrived. Victoria handed them documents. "These are charges of corporate fraud, identity theft, and attempted coercion." Officers moved in. Alawu tried to resist, but was dragged away in handcuffs. His agbada, once a symbol of power, trailed behind like rags. Vicland wasn't just being reclaimed. It was being reborn, with ashes still falling from the sky. The aftermath was chaos laced with clarity. Within hours, the news exploded across media channels. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire CEO returns from silence to dismantle conspiracy." Every detail, from the fake will to the threats, came into the light. Former staff came forward in droves, submitting testimonies of harassment, forced resignations, and coercion by the corrupted board. Videos of the confrontation went viral, gathering millions of views within the first 24 hours. Igioma's attempts to deny the recordings backfired when tech experts verified their authenticity. Amaka, once mocked as the girl who wheeled in a mad woman, was now being hailed as the girl who helped restore an empire. She stayed quiet through the noise, sitting beside Victoria, both women understanding that the battle was only half won. Exposure wasn't justice. Punishment wasn't healing. And the wounds were still fresh. Victoria convened a silent emergency board meeting. No press, no spectacle, just raw truth. Many of the old members were replaced by staff who had once been pushed aside. New policies were introduced overnight. Every document signed during her absence was audited. Investigations were launched into hidden accounts and offshore siphoning orchestrated by Alawu's allies. Internal corruption that had spread through Vicland like a disease was now being flushed out. Amaka, however, refused offers for interviews or fame. Her focus remained firm: protect Victoria, protect the truth, and never let the darkness creep back in. Her days were filled with files, meetings, and testimonies. Her nights were spent watching over Victoria, who still experienced moments of fatigue. But something had shifted between them, a quiet, unspoken bond. They were no longer just helper and helped. They were now family. On the 5th day after the arrests, Victoria called a private staff gathering. No cameras, no outsiders, just the people who had survived the storm. She stood with Amaka beside her and said, "Many of you thought I was gone. Many of you were left to suffer for speaking the truth. But one girl, with no family name and no fancy degree, chose kindness. She carried me not just in a wheelbarrow. She carried my legacy." The room broke into tears. Then, slowly, Victoria pulled out a legal document and signed it in front of them all. "From today forward," she declared, "Amaka is no longer just my assistant. She is my daughter, legally and in heart." Amaka's legs shook as she received the papers. Her tears fell silently. That night, in the room where betrayal once ruled, love and justice finally stood tall. The boardroom that once served as a chamber of deceit now echoed with the sound of justice being delivered. One by one, law enforcement entered, flanked by internal auditors and court officials carrying warrants, files, and sealed orders. Chief Alawu, already in custody, was brought in under escort to face a formal internal disciplinary session before being transferred to the criminal tribunal. His presence alone sent chills down the spines of the remaining board members. Some tried to dissociate themselves, claiming ignorance, while others broke into loud protests, hurling blame at one another. Igioma was dragged in next, disheveled and desperate, still shouting about conspiracies and fake tapes. But no one was listening. The tapes had been verified, the financial records cross-checked, and dozens of staff were already testifying. The empire they tried to steal was crumbling, and it was doing so in front of the very people they once silenced. Amaka sat silently beside Victoria during the proceedings, her eyes fixed on each face, reading the panic behind their forced composure. She had once walked into this building carrying Victoria in a wheelbarrow, a symbol of shame to many, and now she sat as the woman everyone feared. But it wasn't power that drove her, it was justice. She remembered every insult, every mockery, every attempt to erase her existence. Her name wasn't in any Forbes magazine, but her strength was inked in scars, in tears, and in unwavering loyalty. Victoria, calm and collected, nodded to the officers to proceed. "Let the law do its work," she whispered. And so it did. The arrests were swift, public, and unforgettable. Cameras caught Alawu being shoved into a van, his agbada tangled, his face twisted in rage and disbelief. Online, the reactions poured in Vicland cleans house. Girl from the wheelbarrow saves empire. The ripple effect didn't stop at Vicland. Other companies connected to Alawu's business web began launching their own internal investigations. Lawyers who once worked under Igioma started resigning, fearing further exposure. Journalists dug into years of hidden corruption, finding links to offshore accounts, ghost employees, and missing charitable funds. The news cycle was unrelenting, but within Vicland, something beautiful began to grow: hope. Staff walked with their heads high again. Old employees who had been unjustly dismissed were being invited back. HR departments opened anonymous reporting channels. Amaka, though flooded with media requests and public attention, stayed grounded. She still visited the local food stall near the estate every morning, still shared her lunch with the cleaning staff, and still refused to accept any praise she felt she hadn't earned. But her presence spoke volumes. The girl who had once struggled to afford transport was now the face of quiet revolution. And the battle for Vicland had only just begun. It was a cool Friday morning when Victoria summoned every staff member to the central atrium of Vicland. No press was invited. No speeches were printed. It was not a performance. It was a family gathering. Word spread quickly, and by 9 a.m., nearly everyone from top-level directors to janitors filled the marble-floored space, each curious, each hopeful. Victoria walked in slowly, supported slightly by a cane, but with her head held high. Amaka stood behind her, trying to blend into the background, but the crowd wouldn't let her. They broke into quiet applause. Many wiped tears from their eyes. To them, she wasn't just a savior. She was a reminder that good still existed in a world corrupted by greed. Victoria raised her hand and silence fell. "Today," she began, "I am not here to talk about the company. I'm here to talk about loyalty, about dignity, about one girl." She motioned for Amaka to step forward, and reluctantly, the young woman did, her heart racing. Victoria's voice trembled with emotion. "I built this empire from nothing. I survived betrayal, theft, manipulation. And when I lost my mind, when I forgot who I was, everyone left me. Everyone except her." The crowd erupted into soft murmurs. She didn't know my name. She didn't know my past. Yet she carried me with dignity. She protected me from vultures. And even when they came for her, even when they tried to destroy her, she never stopped believing in me. She turned fully to Amaka now. "You have no famous surname, no titles, but you are more royal than any board member I've ever known." From her bag, Victoria pulled out a stack of documents and signed them in front of everyone. "Today, I make this official. Amaka is my daughter, and everything I own she will inherit." The room burst into tears. People stood, applauded, hugged. Many dropped to their knees, thanking Victoria and Amaka for restoring dignity to a place that had lost its soul. Amaka, overwhelmed, cried openly, falling into Victoria's arms. But even in that moment of triumph, she whispered, "Mummy, I don't want to be CEO." Victoria nodded, smiling through her tears. "Then what do you want?" Amaka looked around and said, "A place for girls like me. Poor girls. Unseen girls. Let me build that." And with a simple nod, Victoria agreed. "Then that will be your throne." That afternoon, an internal memo announced the creation of a new department, not for profits, not for politics, but for transformation. Amaka's first role would be building that division from the ground up. She didn't need a throne. She needed purpose. And she had found it in the ruins of betrayal. The world now watched, not a queen rising, but a nation being rebuilt. Amaka's office wasn't built to impress. It was designed to inspire. Unlike the cold glass chambers of the elite executives, hers was warm, simple, and full of light. On the wall behind her desk hung a single framed photo, a younger version of herself pushing a wheelbarrow with Victoria inside it, both unaware of what destiny held. That image grounded her, reminded her of where she came from, and why she was here. On her first day in the new role, she called for a small staff meeting. There were no security escorts, no media gimmicks, just 5 staff members from cleaning, customer service, and accounts, all of whom had been dismissed or demoted during Alawu's reign. "You were unheard. I want you to help me build something for the unheard," she told them. It was the first time many of them had been spoken to with such respect by someone in authority. Her first command wasn't a restructure or a dismissal. It was a reinstatement. Every staff member wrongfully fired or demoted during the power struggle was to be re-evaluated and called back. Those found innocent of misconduct would be reinstated with dignity and compensated. Her second command was bold. Any department with more executives than frontline workers must be audited. We are not a kingdom of suits. We are a family of workers. While some in the upper ranks grumbled, the general workforce celebrated. For the first time, cleaners and drivers had access to wellness programs. Cafeteria food improved. Housing assistance plans were explored. And Amaka walked the floors daily, talking to everyone. "I don't want to rule from a tower," she said. "I want to walk among those I serve." The staff nicknamed her the People's Queen, a title she never officially accepted, but her eyes always glistened when they said it. Still, Amaka knew the shadows hadn't disappeared. Victoria's health was still fragile, and whispers of loyalists to Alawu lingering in remote branches haunted her. But for now, she focused on what could be saved. Her days started before dawn and ended after midnight. Yet, she remained unbroken. One evening, she found herself walking past the same street where she had first found Victoria. The bench was gone, replaced by a flower bed. She knelt there, touched the soil, and whispered, "We're still growing." That night, back at the estate, Victoria handed her a letter. "I never told you everything," she said. "But this might explain why I fought so hard to stay alive." Amaka opened it slowly. Inside was a letter from decades ago, from someone claiming to be Victoria's child. Alive, hidden, searching. Amaka looked up at Victoria, stunned. "The past isn't done with us yet," Victoria whispered. And so, the next chapter of their story quietly began. The letter Amaka held in her hand felt heavier than it should. It wasn't just paper and ink. It was the weight of secrets long buried, of connections lost in time. The handwriting was aged but elegant, bearing the unmistakable pain of someone who had written with trembling fingers and a heart full of longing. The letter was dated nearly 30 years ago and written by a woman named Ifeanyi, claiming she had given birth to Victoria's child, but had been paid off by Victoria's late husband to disappear. The content shook Amaka. If true, it meant that somewhere out there, Victoria had a biological child who might still be alive, and who might not even know who they were. She stared at Victoria, unsure what to say. The older woman's eyes were distant, haunted. "I tried to find her," Victoria whispered, "but I was too broken then. And by the time I got back on my feet, I was too late." Victoria's story unraveled like a tragic confession. When she married her husband in her youth, she had been naive and blindly in love. She had gotten pregnant in the early stages of their marriage, but he convinced her to travel abroad for rest and safety. During that trip, he had manipulated events so that she never saw the child after delivery. He told her the child had died in childbirth. Grief-stricken and numb, Victoria was too weak to investigate, and the trauma pushed her into silence. Years later, she overheard a family conversation that hinted at a different truth, that the child had been given away and the mother told a lie so she could focus solely on building wealth with no distractions. Victoria had searched discreetly, but with little to go on, and when her husband eventually took everything from her, the fire inside her was redirected toward survival rather than search. Now, reading that letter from Ifeanyi, all the old emotions came rushing back, and she trembled with regret. Amaka, while trying to comfort Victoria, made a quiet promise to herself. She would find this missing child, not for inheritance or fanfare, but to help heal a wound that never closed. But she also understood the stakes were now higher. If the child of Victoria was still alive, they could become a target, especially if news leaked that Victoria had adopted Amaka and passed the company to her. Not everyone would accept this transition without resistance, especially those who believed bloodlines should decide leadership. That night, Amaka called a trusted contact, an investigator she had helped years ago when she worked for a female-led street initiative. She handed him the letter, asking him to investigate quietly. "I don't care about DNA or headlines," she said. "Just tell me if this person is alive. That's all." As the investigator left, Amaka turned to Victoria, who had fallen asleep in a chair. Her cane rested against her leg. And just like before, Amaka knelt beside her and whispered, "You carried too much for too long. Let me carry this one." For the first time in weeks, the air around Vikland felt calm. The traitors were gone. The fear that once choked the staff had begun to lift, and Amaka's new department, Seeds of Steel, was gaining traction with the support of ground-level workers and Victoria's silent blessing. Still, Amaka's spirit wasn't at rest. She had seen too many quiet days lead to chaos. From the whispers in elevator shafts to the lingering stares from distant regional heads who hadn't shown much support during the internal crisis. She knew that silence didn't always mean peace. Sometimes it was the sharpest warning. One afternoon, while reading through reports from various branches, she noticed irregularities coming from the Ogun regional office. The numbers didn't add up: massive procurement costs, inflated vendor invoices, and sudden staff terminations that weren't officially logged. Something didn't sit right, and Amaka had learned never to ignore her gut. Instead of sending an audit team or making formal announcements, Amaka chose a different path. She quietly informed Victoria, then booked a late-night bus to Ogun without alerting even her own security team. She dressed down, hiding her identity, and lodged in a small inn outside the city. The next morning, she walked into the regional office unannounced and introduced herself only to the receptionist, asking to see the branch operations officer. Confusion spread through the building like wildfire. Whispers started. "Is that her? The one from the wheelbarrow? Why is she here?" When the branch manager, Mr. Tabena, finally appeared, he looked flustered and pale. Amaka calmly asked for the procurement records, vendor lists, and termination files. She watched his hands tremble as he tried to make excuses. "I just want the truth," she said. "And if there's nothing to hide, there's no reason to fear." By midday, it was clear. The office had been running a parallel fraud ring, misreporting expenditures, and using ghost workers to funnel money into private accounts. But what made it worse was a piece of paper Amaka found half-burned in a waste bin. An old group photo featuring Chief Alawu standing beside Tabena, with a line underneath reading Phase 2 Legacy Plan. It confirmed her worst fear. Alawu's influence had not been completely cut off. He had been planning a wider takeover across several branches, grooming younger officers to eventually rise and reclaim the company from within. Amaka didn't panic. She simply stood up, picked up the photo, and walked out. That evening, she sent Victoria a message. "We cut off the tree, but the roots are still alive." Victoria replied with one word: "Prepare." Amaka didn't sleep that night. The calm was now gone, and she knew the real storm hadn't yet begun. 2 days later, Amaka returned to Lagos and convened a quiet meeting with the internal compliance team. No directors, no PR heads, just a room of 6 trusted, loyal staff, people who had either suffered under Alawu's regime or who had proven themselves during the company's darkest days. She placed the photo on the table and shared everything. Faces stiffened. Shock turned to anger. One of the junior auditors, a quiet woman named Ronk, spoke up. "Ma, there's a pattern. A few months ago, I flagged similar numbers from the Port Harcourt branch, but the reports were dismissed by the last administration." That was it. Amaka knew then that they weren't dealing with isolated fraud. It was an entire network still pulsing under the surface, hiding behind company uniforms and smiling faces. "Then we don't audit them," Amaka said. "We expose them, but not through headlines. We let them walk into the light themselves." She personally led a sting operation, organizing surprise inspections at 3 branches within 48 hours. In each case, she arrived unannounced, asked simple questions, and demanded real-time data. And in each case, the lies unraveled quickly. Managers who had seemed harmless confessed under pressure. One even broke down and admitted he was told to continue Alawu's legacy in exchange for land and power. Amaka filmed everything, not to shame them publicly, but to keep receipts, to ensure that when the final moment came, there would be no denials. The internal rot was deeper than anyone had expected, and for a while, Amaka felt like she was back in the trenches, fighting invisible enemies with nothing but truth as her weapon. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, but not defeated. Every time she passed a cleaner or a secretary, Their greetings reminded her why she couldn't stop. This wasn't just about Victoria. It was about all of them. Late one evening, as she sat in her office reviewing a report, the lights flickered. Her intercom buzzed. But no one was supposed to be there. When she stood to check, her door creaked open slightly, and on the floor she found a mirror, a round pocket mirror broken in half with a note, "The Queen in the mirror is next." Her heart pounded. Someone had been there. Someone who wanted her to feel fear. She stared into the cracked mirror and saw her reflection, distorted but unshaken. She picked it up, placed it in her drawer, and locked it. Then she pulled out her journal and wrote a single sentence. "They think I am Victoria's shadow. Let them learn. Shadows can become storms." Amaka stood at the entrance of the Port Harcourt Regional Branch, dressed in a simple blazer and low heels, holding nothing but a slim brown folder in her hand. Behind her, 2 loyal compliance officers and a discreet security officer from headquarters stood with solemn faces. The branch manager had no idea what was coming. Inside the branch, tension rose like steam. Amaka greeted the receptionist kindly, then walked straight to the large open floor, scanning faces. She didn't shout. She didn't make noise. She simply laid the folder on the manager's table and asked to address the entire staff. Confused murmurs followed, but no one dared disobey. When the employees gathered, Amaka opened the folder and held up a list of names, ghost workers who had been collecting salaries. Her voice was calm but sharp. "These people don't exist," she said. "And yet we've paid them." "Why?" No one answered. She then pulled out copies of falsified invoices, complete with forged signatures and transactions tied to personal accounts. Staff began shifting uncomfortably. The regional manager's hand trembled as he tried to collect himself. But the final blow was a set of printouts showing WhatsApp messages from a private staff group where higher-ups mocked Amaka, bragged about siphoning funds, and called her a wheelbarrow girl pretending to be queen. A silence heavier than lead descended on the room. Amaka let the words hang. "You know, I used to carry bricks, mix cement, take insults. I ate twice a week, wore torn shoes. But I never stole, never lied, never mocked those beneath me." Her voice cracked slightly, but she held her ground. "Some of you were handed power and used it to destroy others. Today that ends." By the time she returned to Lagos, she had personally shut down 2 branches and suspended over 15 staff. But it wasn't about numbers anymore. It was the message she sent. Vicland was no longer a safe place for thieves and pretenders. Those who mocked her for pushing a wheelbarrow had now watched her push fraud out the front door. That night, Victoria waited for her in the private garden, seated under the stars with a blanket around her knees. Amaka sat beside her quietly, emotionally drained but fulfilled. "I watched your live feed," Victoria whispered, her voice proud but raspy. "You didn't just walk into fire, you became it." Amaka smiled faintly, tears building in her eyes. "I was afraid, but I remembered what you said, that I carried you. Now, you've taught me how to carry myself." Victoria reached for her hand. "And now, it's time I make something official," she said softly. "Not because the world demands it, but because my heart does." The boardroom was quiet, not tense, not anxious, just respectfully quiet. The air felt thick with anticipation as all members of Vicland, both old and new, gathered for the first full leadership meeting since the internal storm had passed. In the center sat Victoria, regal in her composure despite her age and the battles she had faced. She wore a simple, elegant gown with gold embroidery, and beside her stood Amaka, no longer the girl from the roadside, no longer the confused helper with dust on her face, but a woman refined by fire. With quiet dignity, Victoria rose and addressed the room. "Many of you know me as the founder. Some of you tried to erase me. Some of you fought to keep me standing. But only one person carried me, not because she had to, but because she chose to. That is royalty in its truest form." The room was still. She looked at Amaka, her eyes shining. "I have no surviving blood relatives, but God sent me a daughter." She reached into her bag and drew out a legal document. "As of today, I legally adopt Amaka Neka, Obi, as my child and heir. Not just of my wealth, but of my name." A collective gasp swept through the room. No one had expected this level of finality. Then she turned to Amaka. You have the right to lead this company. But if you choose to walk a different path, I will still be proud. The throne is yours to define. Amaka stepped forward, trembling slightly, and took the microphone. I don't want to be CEO, she said, her voice steady. At least not yet. What I want is to build a division that finds more girls like me, the ones ignored, overlooked, underestimated. I want this company to remember where its heart should be, among the forgotten. Thunderous applause filled the room. Staff who once mocked her now clapped with tears in their eyes. Journalists outside, who had been kept at bay by security, finally heard the announcement as it leaked online. Billionaire queen adopts wheelbarrow girl. Vicland's future secured. Victoria stepped aside as Amaka stood alone before the company that once shut its gates in her face. She wasn't afraid anymore. The throne wasn't just a chair, it was a crown made of broken bricks, sleepless nights, threats, hunger, and faith. Victoria smiled as she walked to the exit, whispering to herself, "The girl carried me. Now she carries the world." As Amaka returned to her new office, she paused by the mirror, the same one shattered by a warning weeks ago. But now her reflection didn't show a servant or a victim. It showed a queen, rebuilt from ashes. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.